Well, my name's John Crowther. I'm a comic book writer and author of autobiographies for pro wrestlers, so a little bit of a wrestling historian. I've worked for Heavy Metal Magazine, Antarctic Press, AC Comics, and most recently Silverline, and a whole bunch of other indies where I've contributed to a series of, I guess, collected comics. What do they call? What do we call them? Anthologies. So a lot
Yeah.
of anthologies as well.
So how long have you been doing comics for?
I started in comics around 2014, and it was an interesting story of how it got started. My daughter at the time was 15 years old. She's a 25-year-old tattoo artist now, but at the time, she was an innocent young girl who liked to go to comic cons, and I was not a huge fan of the female superheroes that were being provided to young girls. That was just my personal opinion, but I also believe that if you don't like something, do something about it. So I decided to write my own comic. And it worked out for me twofold. Number one, I didn't have to pay these huge entrance fees to get into Comic Cons. I could get in and get a table and get 2 free chairs, and I could sit down and relax while she walked around, and I could make some money at the same time. So it kind of worked out for me. So I've been in it about 10 years now.
Nice. And you got a lot of books out there.
Yeah, it worked out well for me. I did this. It was Rochelle was my first comic. It's interesting how it started. Being not being in the comic industry, I wasn't exactly sure how to go about it. So the first thing I did was look up an artist that I had admired as a kid. I was a huge fan of comics in the 70s and the 80s, and into the 90s a bit. So I looked up a guy named Del Barris, who had broken into the industry back in the 70s, initially with Savage Sword of Conan. He was an inker. And then he got on Blue Beetle. And I mean, he's worked for everybody, DC, Marvel, tons of that stuff. Death's Head, I think, with Marvel UK. So I wrote him a letter, told him I had an idea. And lo and behold, about a month or so later, I got a letter back with a nice piece of art that said, "Give me a call and send me a script. Let's do it." So I called him, I talked, I kind of played it off like, I've always said if you want to make it, just fake it. So I faked it like I knew exactly what I was talking about. We got off the phone. I used the power of Google, and I reached out to, oh God, why am it slipping me now? Writer of Crises on Infinite Earths, Marv Wolfman. I found Marv Wolfman's website. I reached out to Marv and bought a script from him so I would know how to write a script, so I'd have a format. So I got the format. I wrote out a script based on the format of how Marv had done his, sent it to Dell. He connected me with AC Comics, which is a longtime publisher, but a small publisher just outside of Orlando. I want to say they're based out of Apopka, if I'm right, Apopka or Kissimmee. They ran the first issue of Rochelle as a flip book for their FemForce series. Have you ever heard of FemForce?
No.
Okay, well, FemForce is the longest running female superhero team comic in history. They're still going strong. They're well over 300 issues. But they ran Rochelle as a flip book for that. It did very well for them. And I ended up connecting with Joe and Ben Dunn over at Antarctic Press. And they hadn't really been bringing too many people in outside of Ninja High School and Gold Digger. But I proposed to them about bringing Rochelle over. And again, I did a lot of faking it. And they bit. And I joined up with them. And I had 2 3-issue runs with Antarctic Press with the Rochelle series, and made some great connections there. And I found out, which kind of allowed me to segue a little bit, kind of background. I was also a big fan of wrestling as a kid. So a couple of pro wrestlers, most notably Nikolai Volkov, who was in WrestleMania 1 with the Iron Sheik, he got a hold of a copy of Rochelle, and he reached out to me. And I can't do a Russian accent, so I won't try and fake it. But he said, I got a phone call from him, and I knew it was him as soon as I heard his voice. But he said, "How would you like to write my story as a comic?" And I couldn't say yes fast enough. So that's how I started doing these autobiography comics for pro wrestlers. It was through Nikolai. I connected with the folks over at, Kevin Laporte. It was Kevin Laporte and Amanda. I can't remember Amanda's last name. You can tell my age. But we ended up Inverse Press. They were with Inverse Press. I had watched them do Kickstarters, and they were extremely successful in their Kickstarters. I mean, they weren't these blowout $50,000, $100,000 Kickstarters, but they bring in a solid $5,000 to $10,000 every Kickstarter, and they always fulfilled. And they always got their books out to people like that. And I always wanted, if I did anything, I always wanted to make sure I got it done. I never wanted to disappoint a customer. So I connected with them. Turns out they were wrestling fans. They decided to create what was called Squared Circle Comics as a subsidiary of Inverse Press. And we blew up with these wrestling comics with Nikolai Volkov, Bruno Sammartino, the Rock and Roll Express, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Rocky Johnson, the father of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Terry Funk. I mean, we just went crazy with these wrestling comics. Ended up doing wrestling encyclopedias, all of those things. And it just really starting to keep me busy. But while I was doing that, I was also segueing off on this side. I connected with heavy metal and contributed to heavy metal with some stories. And then started jumping in a lot of Antarctic Press's anthologies, things like Planet Comics and Jungle Comics and Exciting Comics, those types of things. So it ended up adding up a pretty large portfolio of comic books over the last 10 years. And then most recently, as we were talking before we came on, connected with SilverlineComics, which is run by Roland Mann. Roland, for people who might not know, is the former editor-in-chief of Malibu Comics, which was a subsidiary of Marvel Comics. So he's been around the block a bit. He actually teaches comics at Sale University, too. For anybody in the area who wants to go to college for comics, yes, you can do that. But I connected with Roland and still working with Dell because of the Blue Beetle experience that Dell had. Is when I created the Teen Beetle. So that's the comic series I'm currently working on, is a 3-issue run with Silverline Comics on the Teen Beetle, which we should go to a Kickstarter on issue 3 sometime, hopefully by the end of this year. Before that book will find its way into comic stores, hopefully in 2025. And I know that was long-winded, but I got it all out.
That was beautiful. Yes, that was absolutely what I was looking for. Thank you. Your wrestling comics, or is it like comics about wrestling matches, or do these wrestlers go on like real world adventures? What kind of wrestling?
It's autobiographical. So what we've done is I've tried to get into their history, what their background was about, what got them into wrestling, and then usually the question I hit them with is, give me about 4 or 5 of your what you see as your most important matches of your career. And those are the ones that I touch on in their books. Like, for instance, when I was working with Terry Funk, he had me rolling all the time. And he says, all my matches. He says, I never lost. I'm like, come on, Terry. I saw it on TV. And he goes, well, you want the old banana nose, which was referring to Ric Flair, or do you want the one with the mashed potato guy, which was referring to Dusty Rhodes? So I mean, it was really comical for him, but that's really what it was. It wasn't like going off on these any kind of fantasy stories or just focusing on matches. It was their life story. It was an autobiography, which tell you, it ended up leading to me during COVID. And I don't know, are we PG rated or R rated? I don't know what we are.
You're good. Yeah, it's not for kids.
COVID hit around 2019, 2020?
Yeah.
I had gotten to know quite a few wrestlers just from doing conventions, because I was kind of moving from just doing comic conventions to doing a combination of comic conventions and pro wrestling conventions, because I learned pretty quickly that wrestling comics is really a niche. And the king of that is Michael Kingston. If you can ever get Michael on, he'd be a fantastic guest. But he's really the king of wrestling comics. But so I was doing both of these, and I got to know a lot of wrestlers just from doing those. And one of the guys I became very close with was Luke Williams, who was Bushwhacker Luke. Was a 2015 WWE Hall of Famers, the Bushwhackers. And he called me during COVID, and he said, hey, mate, how'd you like to write a real fucking book? And I said, let's do it. I got plenty of time. I can't go anywhere. We're stuck in the house. I had been approached over the past few years about doing traditional books, one by Brian Blair of the Killer Bees, because I had done their comic series. Also by Bugsy McGraw, who I just recently, yesterday, actually did a show with him up in Jacksonville. And I turned both of these guys down just because I don't know if it was a mix of intimidation, trying to move from comics to a traditional style book that's like 300 or 400 pages. I wasn't sure if I was ready to make that leap along with my day job, I'm actually an attorney, so I'm usually pretty busy. So I didn't know if I had the time or and then just the fear of trying to do the unknown, which I shouldn't have had. I mean, I did jump into comics, but I eventually said, hey, let's do it. So for about a year and a half, closing on 2 years, every Wednesday night for about an hour and a half, I would chat with Luke and Butch. And we put together the Bushwhackers autobiography. It was called The Bushwhackers Blood, Sweat, and Cheers, which did fantastic. I mean, it really put me on the map, I think, as a wrestling historian, and connected me more with a lot of wrestlers who do want to get their life stories out there. Made its way all the way up to #1 in several categories on Amazon. I can't be happier with that book. So currently, in addition to the Team Beetle series, some of the listeners might have heard of them, some maybe not, but I'm currently working on a book for Glacier, Ray Lloyd, who was a standout with WCW back around 96, 97, 98 as a wrestler. He was kind of what was that, Mortal Kombat looking character, is what his, it was pretty cool. It was actually the most, as I mentioned before we came on, it was the most expensive entrance of any wrestler in history. I mean, I think it would average between $50,000 and $80,000 every time he walked to the ring, with all the pyrotechnics and lights and lasers and fake snow flying out of the ceilings in these stadiums whenever he would walk to the ring. So
I'm gonna look it up. After this interview, I'm gonna look at his intro.
Yeah, definitely look up the Glacier. So I don't know, with the amount of money they put into that, I'm still shocked that they didn't push him a little harder with that character. But hey, it's wrestling,
You're right.
One night might not be the hot thing the next one.
Yeah, I think I was watching wrestling early 2000s when Stone Cold, Undertaker, Kane, all of them, Sting.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell's going on now.
Honestly, and I hate saying it, I mean, I'm still a traditionalist. For me to watch wrestling, I'm usually getting on Peacock, which is about to jump over Netflix, and I'm watching the old WCCW and WCW and Championship Wrestling from Florida matches. I'm still into the old school stuff. When it was more wrestling and less high flying, that kind of crazy stuff that they do now. It's more acrobatics, I think, than it is wrestling.
What social medias are you on nowadays?
Well, I've tried to, I'm going on 53, so I've had to learn about a lot of the new ones. Primarily, and my daughter laughs and says it's for old folks, but I'm primarily on Facebook. But both as my personal page, which I do open it up to whoever wants to become a friend or follow or whatever they want to do there. I don't have anything to hide, but I've got that. I've also got my writer page. I'm on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. I'm on Threads, but I'm on Threads because I learned that on Instagram I can do a post and I can click a switch that allows me to also make it on Threads. So if you try and message me on Threads, I don't know if I'll even get the message or not because I'm kind of only connected through whatever I put on Instagram. I'm on Snap, but I don't know. I don't even really know how to use it. I send these funny pictures to my daughter all the time. So I don't know exactly what else you can do with Snap, but I am on Snap.
Okay. Do you have a website or anything?
I do. It's it'd be squaredcircle.com, I think is where you'd find it, or squaredcirclepublishing.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
What cons are you? Yeah, I'll put it all down in the description.
Yeah.
What cons are you going to be at this year?
I'm trying to think. The next one I've got lined up is in August. It's over in Orlando. It's Infinity Toy and Comic Con.
Okay.
I know I'll be at Daytona Beach. I know I'll be at DeLand Comic Con. Like I said, I do a lot of wrestling ones. There'll be another big wrestling one coming up probably around June or July over in Orlando. River City will be around June or July. I used to do a lot more out of the area, but I've kind of slowed that down the older I've gotten. I'm a former guest of MegaCon, but I realized that was taxing. 4 days of driving over. one of the things I've learned about doing cons is they're more than happy to give you a table, but that's about it if you're a comic creator. So by the time you've bought a hotel and you paid for your gas and you paid for your food and done all of that kind of stuff, you got to sell a heck of a lot of books to break even. So I tend to stay more to the local stuff. And I wasn't really into the parking in a garage and walking. It seemed like a half a mile to my table every every show. But so no, if you find yourself local in the Central Florida area and there's a con, I'll probably be there. I know there's I think it's Claremont Comic Con or Lake City. It's called Lake City Comic Con. I'll be at that one this year. I think that's in November.
Okay.
Yeah, yesterday I was up at First Coast Comic Con in Jacksonville, which was a nice little show at University of North Florida.
A 1-day show?
Yep, 1-day show. Inconvenient. It was I stayed they got me a hotel, which was nice. It's a rarity. Got me a hotel. So I was able to, save the drive up and back on the same day. And nice guy running the show, great crowd. So I found that a lot of those smaller shows, you're not in competition with a ton of different creators for fans, and you're not necessarily in a lot of competition with the big names. I don't consider myself a big name by any stretch of the imagination, but it can make it, it can make having the fans filter down to you can be a little bit tougher sometimes when the big guns come to the show. So it's sometimes nice to be in the small ones and the local ones where everybody and you can really get down and converse with the fans when they come out and sign some books and maybe sell a few books at the same time.
Have you ever had any weird fan experience?
Weird fan? I don't
Or
really
memorable?
Memorable. I do. I remember, honestly, one of the first shows I ever did. I will say this, and I can't remember the young lady's name. It was the first time that I realized the reach that you can have with comics. I was doing an outdoor show in Bartow. I forget what the name of the show. It was like, I don't think it was called Bartow Comic Con, but it was this show they had where everyone set up tables like in this downtown district of Bartow, Florida, small Central Florida town. I actually got a whole bunch of wrestlers to come out too. I want to say I had I know I had Tugboat there. I had Ron Bass. I had Leilani Kai, who was the former women's champion. I had all these wrestlers there. Luke Williams from the Bushwhackers. I had my own table. I'm sitting there. I'm not thinking anybody's going to know who I am. And up walks this guy with his little daughter, and she's probably about 10 years old. And he says, "We drove all the way here from Jacksonville because my daughter read your comic book and she made me bring her here to meet you." And that was the time, and it really touched me, and it made me realize how much you can connect with people and not realize that you are. And what I was trying to do with my book, which was initially for my daughter, I realized I was able to reach other young girls and boys too. I mean, it's not just a girls' comic book, but I was able to. It was fulfilling what I wanted it to fulfill, and it was extremely special to me. And I'll never forget it. I can remember her to this day walking up. In fact, I think I got a picture somewhere of the two of us when she came up. But yeah, I mean, no weird fan experiences, but some very special ones like that. I mean, it's really nice to see somebody come up and say they appreciate your work and that it hit a note with them. It means something to them, because when we're only here for how many years in your life, which in the big stretch of things is just a blip on the radar. But if you can make an impact on somebody or you can leave something behind after you're gone, I think you've accomplished something. I mean, you can be the richest, most famous person in the world, but if you don't leave a blip for somebody and you make a point with somebody or you touch somebody, what's it worth?
Mm-hmm. I agree. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
No, I mean, I just thank you for having me on. I hope that people will check out some of the stuff I've done. If you Google my name and look it up, a lot of things will pop up. Feel free to follow me on Facebook or any of the other sites if you like, and reach out. I love chatting with people. Keep an eye open for the Teen Beetle series when it comes out and the other books by Silverline. If you like books that are kind of like a throwback to the 80s and 90s, I think you'll love what Silverline's doing. If you like wrestling, please go on Amazon, check out what the Bushwhackers book, and keep an eye open for Glacier and some of the other ones that will be coming down the pipe in the next few years. I think we're doing some good stuff and telling some good stories, and I hope you'd like to join in on them.
All right. I appreciate you taking the time to come talk with me.
Thank you, Cody.
What? You mean you haven't subscribed to Comic Chat Authority? Oh, come on, subscribe already. What are you waiting for? It's no big deal. Like, man, don't forget to tell him to hit that like button. Yeah, that too. Just subscribe.